Welcome. Welcome. Hello. Welcome. Sziasztok. How is everybody tonight? Good, good. Thank you all for coming to our fireside chat. I want to say a few words about what a fireside chat is and why we have them. Fireside chats are basically very relaxed, very informal conversations, usually two, but on occasion three people. It's not a panel, it's not a debate, certainly not a debate. It's basically an open, candid conversation that people would have when they're thinking about issues. One of the things that I want to do tonight is I want to think out loud. And that is not without its risks. Could I have everybody kind of, hello, I don't know, sziasztok, köszönöm. So one of the things that I'd like to do tonight is I would like to think out loud, because I don't know the answers to moral questions. And that comes with a risk. I have moral hunches and I have moral intuitions. And when I articulate that, we live in an age where not knowing the answers to moral questions can often paint you as wishy-washy, or it can paint you as weak. So I want to say one more thing now, that a theme that's run up in the panel since we've been here is that the problems in universities in the United States, in England, now spreading to Western Europe, and hopefully not spreading to Hungary. In the United States, it's common to issue a trigger warning before a speech, and that is if people are triggered, if they hear something that they find so odious or so damaging to their mental health. Well, I'm going to issue a reverse trigger warning tonight. If you hear something that's so offensive and we will talk about some controversial sexual issues, we'll talk about a wide range of controversies. Listen, take ownership of what you believe. Try to figure out, using the tools that you have, what you believe and why you believe it. Don't run for the door, don't head for the hills, don't collapse, don't become brittle, don't lie to yourself. Take responsibility for who you are and for what you believe. And beyond that, if one of us makes a good point, I'm going to make a pledge to you right now. I'll pledge two things. One, I will never pretend to know something I don't know. Two, if something comes up in this conversation and I change my mind, I will tell you in real time. And that's the advantage of this as opposed to a debate where people want to win. Nobody wants to win. In fact, in the Gorgias, Plato says, Socrates says that being refuted is better than refuting, because it brings you closer to the truth. So with that, I open up to our fireside chat. Thank you.
Before we start, if you're an American here or from Western Europe, you need to go quickly to the bar and get what they call here a frutsch. That's a word that means basically wine spritzer, but it's really good. It comes from the city of Győr, where they invented it, but it's lovely. So go get a frutsch while you can.
And may I add something? We are at the end of the day, end of the wonderful 2 days conference, and I want to send all my best greetings to MCC staff and MCC students and MCC academic people, because I think they made a wonderful job. So can they get some applause? Congratulations. It was a wonderful event. Thank you very much for all joining. And frutsch, actually, all the foreigners has to understand that frutsch has nothing to do with the quality of wine. So we don't put water in the wine because the quality of the wine is low, but we do it because it tastes better. So it's a high quality wine, but still you can make it. You can try it. Do not matcha tonic, but frutsch instead of this.
Well,
It took me for like 2 months to convince you that it's not about the quality of the wine.
Yeah.
But finally, I can remember when the first time we
thank you for your
you know,
perseverance.
Rod was.
I think we could start out tonight by a funny story about me and Peter. I know Peter by reputation in the U.S. He's,
Oh, no.
What's up?
Oh, no.
No, but I mean, seriously, I hope I don't mean to falsely flatter you, but you really are one of the bravest people on the scene. Now, you're a man of the left, you're an atheist, I'm a man of the right, I'm a Christian, but we found common cause, and we both want to defend liberty and freedom of expression, these classical liberal values that are under intense assault. But we didn't know each other, and Peter sent me an email because he knew that I'd been in Hungary. Maybe I was still here or I'd come home from here. But he said, listen, I'm considering going to MCC as a visiting fellow, but I don't know about Hungary. You know, I know what people say about Hungary, and I don't know if it's right for me. I said, listen, Peter, I know what your situation is at your university in Portland, Oregon. And I can tell you that MCC is, the ethos there is conservative, but you will be incomparably more free in Hungary in general and at MCC in particular to have conversations that you can't have in American universities, certainly not in your ultra-woke university. So go there. You'll meet conservatives, you'll meet liberals, and you can have a normal conversation and you can end as friends. So he decided to come. You've been here how long now?
A month.
A month, and we only met face-to-face when I got here 2 weeks ago, and you said to me about your experience in Hungary. Was I right?
Yeah, it's been a remarkable experience for me. I actually think I needed the mental health break to be here, and I had watched the city of Portland really just fall to the murder rates went up and the number of tent camping with homelessness, and it was not a place that I wanted to be or felt safe anymore. And so I'll be very candid about my experience here. So one of the things that I was told here is, by the administration, they said, you know what, we want you to talk to as many people as you want to talk. If you want to talk to members of the opposition, tell us. We'll set those meetings up. And I said, okay, and they set those meetings up. And I was flabbergasted by that. I mean, that's an utterly remarkable. Maybe the Hungarian mind doesn't. That's not something extraordinary. But that was just an extra. And if I may, I've watched you. Can I tell this? May I tell that story?
Yes, of course.
Are you sure? Okay, so for an American, and I guess if you're UK, this is quite a story. I've been thinking about this quite a lot. So we were in here, and there's a very staunch member of the opposition who constantly bashes, the administration and the policies. Peter Kreco is his name. And so the administration had set that meeting up with me, and we were talking right here. And
the administration is MCC
MCC administration.
It has nothing to do with the government.
Right. And so Balázs came in, and Peter immediately pulled up a chair, and they shook hands. And they started talking, and to be sure, they had a spirited disagreement, to be sure. But nobody viewed the other person as a traitor or as an existential enemy or as someone that they, frankly, wanted to kill. It was a remarkable exchange. And again, I'm not minimizing those differences, but they didn't look at the other person as somebody who wanted to or was a stain on the country of Hungary. They looked at the other person, it's somebody with whom they had considerable disagreement. And you know what happened when they got up and left? They shook hands. And that's what I would like to see in my country, that I do not see.
It's remarkable that we don't really see that, and this didn't just happen overnight in the U.S. It took a long time, but I often fear that we in America are in a state like Spain in the early 1930s. Before I went to Spain a few years ago to promote a Spanish translation of one of my books, I decided I needed to know a little more about contemporary Spanish history. So I watched a 1980s era BBC documentary about the Spanish Civil War. And it was actually quite well done. I expected it would be biased to the left, but believe it or not, it was really fair, right down the middle. And the documentary filmmakers had the opportunity to interview people on both sides, both the nationalist and the Republican side, who had fought in the war. They were still alive back then. And it was extraordinary to me and chilling as an American to watch the first episode about the prelude to the war and about how when the Republic was declared in early 1930s in Spain, some of the left-wing radicals burned churches and convents. And then when the right came back into power 2 years later with the election, they sought their revenge. And then it swung back to the left. By the time it got to 1935, about a year before the war broke out, people hated each other so much they couldn't see the humanity of their fellow Spaniards. The filmmakers interviewed this phalangist, a far-right guy, who said, yeah, by 1935, when we were sitting on the street and you would see a socialist come walking by, we only saw the horns of a devil, and they felt the same way about us. I worry, Peter, that we are fast getting to that position in the U.S. It's hard for me to imagine a civil war in the U.S. in this day and age, but that polarization and the dehumanization is something very real.
Yeah, and I'm 55. I never even heard the term national divorce. Like, I never even heard it until like a year ago. And now everyone's talking about a national divorce, which means, well, I don't know everyone, but it's gained traction, currency, that we're going to break the country up into Republican and Democrat or liberal and conservative. I mean, that's insane. So I really hope that you don't lose what you have here.
Okay, it's very obvious that it will be my role to defend the United States of America in this conversation. So it's still the coolest place on earth, I have to say. And I can remember after my graduation at the university, it was a present what I had that first I could go to New York and I spent some days in New York. I visited my relatives in Vancouver. I went to Portland back at that time, and then I came back through Toronto, and it was wonderful. And since then, we, with the small friends of young Hungarians, we made tours around the United States. So one tour was that we landed at LA, and we bought a van there, and we drove up until Seattle. And from Seattle, we went across the country until New York. It was more than 3 weeks trip. And I learned extremely much about myself. I learned extremely much about my country and your country as well. So that country, I think it's not in an as bad shape as you feel. And honestly, I have to add that here in Hungary, we are in the middle of an election campaign. So it's also not an easy period of time, and but I think that's part of Hungarian political culture, and that's what I keep talking about in my book as well. That polarization and Republican kind of tradition of disagreement is not a problem among the people. The 19th century was the brightest modern period of my country, when the most important statements, like Lajos Kossuth or István Széchenyi, they were wonderful people, they were wonderful politicians, but they hated each other. So they were so offensive towards each other. They didn't have any single kind of agreement. So I think polarization, in a sense that you have the right of disagree and debating, it can be very useful.
Yeah.
You just have to obviously find a common ground, which here in Hungary, according to my understanding, is a national interest. Probably that's this common ground, what you lost. It's not
what is our national interest?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say that's a perfect segue to talk about some of our disagreements.
Yeah. Well, in the U.S., when my parents were kids back in the 30s and the 40s, most of our disagreements nationally were economic. And now our politics has been is almost entirely cultural.
Correct.
And you and I were talking just the other day about this thing that has emerged in America in the past week or so. There is a guy in Washington named Sam Brinton, a young man. He says he's non-binary. He's been an LGBT activist for a while. He's also a nuclear expert. He has an engineering degree from MIT, which is the top tech university in the States. He's also an LGBT activist, as I said. He's bald-headed, but he dresses in evening gowns and high heels.
With bright lipstick.
Bright lipstick with a mustache. But he does this on purpose. He said that he wants us to be part of his activism because he likes to provoke conversations with people. The reason he's in the news now is because he's just been appointed as some sort of deputy secretary in charge of nuclear waste policy at the Department of Energy.
By the Biden administration.
By the Biden administration.
You're talking about the dog guy,
The
right?
dog guy.
The dog guy.
Yeah.
Okay, I got
Okay,
it.
so...
Sometimes I have no idea what they're talking about. It's just, it's some way...
Okay, so dog
It's a
guy.
way.
Why did Balázs call him dog guy? Because this guy is involved in kink, sexual perversity from my point of view. He is involved in sadomasochism. He is the trainer of dogs, which is to say, he is the master, and his male boyfriends who pretend to be dogs dress up in leather, and they get tails for themselves. I'll leave it to you to imagine how they put the tails on, and they act like dogs.
Yes, and occasionally, I think a detail there is occasionally they defecate and urinate on the floor.
On the floor, yeah. And this guy he gave an interview about this a few years ago, had a picture of himself with a collar around his dog. They call it pup play. And he's gone to college campuses to give advocacy talks about sadomasochism. It's extremely weird. And now that this guy's been given by the Biden administration a high government appointment, some people on the right, many people on the right, are outraged. So, like, how does a freak like this get this high up in the government? I put something online about it. A lot of people were doing it. And Peter, you tweeted out.
Yeah, I tweeted out, as long as he's good with his job, who cares what his kinks are? Yeah. And so I'd like to talk about that because I think that's really important. And I'll start by admitting this is an extreme. This is not like this guy had sex with his girlfriend and put those videos online, which we could have that conversation too.
Revenge porn.
Or not even revenge porn, just to show everybody what a great lover he was. But I will say, so here to me is the question. The question is, well, there are two questions. One, which I'm fairly confident I have the right moral answer on. Does the fact that what he does sexually disqualify him from a government job? And my answer would be no. But the second question that I think is far more interesting is, does the fact that he's hyper-public about that disqualify him from a public job?
Yeah, and that is the question. I agree with you that if he kept this to himself, we couldn't possibly, I don't see it as legitimate to say he shouldn't have a government job, because I think we have to, if we're going to live in a free society and in a pluralistic society, we have to have a pretty strong line between public and private life, because people get up to all kinds of things. So I would not want the guy to be kept out of a job if he's otherwise qualified because he's into kink. The problem I have with him is his kink is so extreme, and he is so in your face about it. He wants people to get mad about it so he can advocate for his rather extreme sexual preferences.
Yeah. So I'm just, in the spirit of what I said in the beginning, I'm just going to think out loud. I'm going to try to reason morally to this. So first thing I want to do is I want to see if I can establish a baseline for something that I would say it is unacceptable to transfer into the governmental realm.
Don't do that, Peter. I agree with you, so I support you. I think that is an independent adult person. He can do whatever he wants.
What if he gets fleas? What if he has fleas? What's going to happen?
Yeah, but
okay. So all right.
That's a strange thing, but anyway, he is an adult person. he can have his or her own sexual behavior. He can, you know, in a time of social media, you know, it's almost impossible that it get not published. I think it has nothing wrong with that.
Okay, well, let me say this to you. In this interview he gave...
Until the moment, it's not mandatory to follow his direction.
Right.
So
Right,
it's
well, but see,
I
this
think
is-
that's the red line. I don't want to follow it. I
Okay,
don't
but
want to be
this
involved
is-
in that.
This is part of the context, though, Balázs, is that we live in a culture, a very fast evolving culture in the U.S. where you can't say anything negative about this guy. And I can imagine the people who are going to have to work with him at the Department of Energy must be terrified that he's going to be looking at them when he comes in his dress or whatever and waiting for them to criticize, and then he will destroy their lives. Because this is what these activists do. But going back to the dog thing, what would you say if this guy's particular kink was not pup play, as they call it, but Nazi play or race play, which is two other areas of sadomasochism that involve taking sexual pleasure through humiliation by pretending to be Nazis or through racial humiliation. I think this guy...
Okay,
That's illegal.
I want to take that.
That's illegal. Forsta.
Let's go ahead.
That's illegal. That's a different time.
Why is it? It's not illegal in America.
Oh yeah, but I think it's illegal in Europe, and we all
Nazi-
understand.
to
Yeah,
dress
yeah,
up
yeah.
in a
Nazi
Nazi
signs
uniform
and
and have
uniforms
sex with
and
people? Well-
and whatever, and the same with communism. So, and communist signs and uniforms and whatever are illegal here in Central Europe and not illegal in
Okay.
Western Europe. So
All right.
different
So-
perspectives, but.
Okay, so let's run with that. So let's bracket the Nazi thing because it's illegal here. But let's say that he was, you know, a KKK member. And fortunately, you don't have them here. They're another kind of racist crazy. But when you ask the question, would that kind of a priori disqualify one from employment? Like, what type of employment? Let's say the guy is a KKK member, and he's, and I'm thinking out loud here. Let's say that he's a KKK member, and or a neo-Nazi or what have you, and he does this sex play, and he's a gardener. He's a gardener that he's hired by it would seem to me that's fundamentally different from being a KKK doing sexual race play and being a police officer. So there seems to be some kind of context would seem to matter to me. Again, I'm thinking out loud,
Right, but
context would seem to matter.
I think that every society has taboos. You can't have any society without taboos. I think that in the case of Sam Brenton and his S&M, or if he were involved in race play, Nazi play, that is something that we should stigmatize, because if people are that twisted, they should be forced to keep it to themselves or be punished if they don't.
But okay, so I guess maybe that's a difference. Like I wouldn't use the word twisted because that has like a moral. See, to me, your kinks.
It's all moral.
So for me, that's not moral. Like for me, what one does sexually, and there are exceptions to this. You know, like non-consenting or someone under 18. Like there are exceptions, but what two adults do sexually to me, or more than 5 adults, that to me isn't a moral issue.
Yeah, well, the thing is, we have to, if they kept it private, I think it's immoral, but I don't care. I wouldn't say there should be shunned publicly for it. But in this case, what you approve of publicly, you get more of. So I think Sam Brenton is a trailblazer in a sense, in that he moves the Overton window, as we say, towards kink, when it is no longer considered to be shameful to have sex with men pretending to be animals. I know this is such an enlightening conversation, elevating conversation, but it's important though, because I think this is a big part of our society.
I agree. I think it's extremely important because it speaks to something more deeper.
My problem is that it tells a lot about the society. What are the top priority topics? Yeah. And if the top priority topics in a society are not serious topics or not important topics,
yes, okay,
that's a problem.
Okay, so
that's a problem.
Yeah, so
because you lose focus, and that's what we try to avoid in Hungary. That don't want to put the top of the priority list something which is not affecting the way of life of 99% of the Hungarians.
So here's my take on that. So I've been convinced from around 2012 that the fundamental failing of the United States is a failure to morally triage. Douglas Murray has said similar things.
What does that mean, moral triage?
Well, it's a failure to. So when you triaging in a hospital, you look at someone who goes into a hospital who needs the most work to save their lives, and you give them the most work. Like you make a decision, and then you provide care based upon how ill someone is. I think that we have an inverted sense of moral priorities. It's a complete like the pronoun thing is insane to me. Like that this should even be an issue when we have, Uyghurs literally being murdered. We have, inflation. I don't want to buzzkill the evening. We're talking about all the stuff that's wrong in the U.S. and the planet. But the idea is that how do we make a hierarchy of moral values and then act upon those in the realm of public policy? And the fact that this Brenton thing is just such an issue right now. I mean, it's so interesting to me, but in the same sense, I actually do think that I don't think it's as important as other issues, but I think that the fact that we're talking about it now speaks to the culture war. I think that there's a there.
Well, here's the thing about Brenton. He is a condensed symbol of a moral outlook. And the moral outlook, which, as broadly speaking, conquered all the elite institutions in American life, says that you cannot pass negative judgment on anyone sexually for any reason because it's part of their identity. Well, you're not going to have your children wanting to run off and become Sam Brenton, the dog freak, right? But we see now happening in teenage culture in America, in high schools and colleges, people exploring their gender identity, their sexual identity, and going down to some very dark places with permanent physical effects on.
For sure. Okay, so that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I mean, that's such an important issue. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a big thing now. And when the society around us says that you can even go as far as Sam Brenton in your sexual expression and nobody dares say anything about it, and you can achieve high government posts even if you were really, really screwed up, I think that's a terrible thing that's ultimately going to be felt by ordinary people who will never meet Sam Brenton, but they're going to have to deal with their kids.
But I think that's a red line, and in that situation, the red line is crossed because it's not about the individual person, then it's about our children. And that's how you differentiate.
What's the red? For you, is the red line not that he did it, but that he made it public? What's the red line?
No. I just don't want to follow it. If he makes it public and it's interesting for somebody, then fine, you can go ahead. The distinction comes in that direction where it affects our children's life. Because we have to take responsibility.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So are you afraid that if somebody who's like 12, and again, I hate to be vulgar, but I have to be vulgar because we're talking about something that's just the nature of what we're talking about. So are you afraid that if a kid who's, say, 12 sees a man dressed as a dog sodomize another man dressed as a dog for defecating on the floor in an hour-long video, are you afraid that child will want to become a sex, like a pup? I mean, what's the concern? Is it like...
The concern is that I'm a parent. I have two boys right now, and I see the challenge that how can you explain them the word, and I want to be sure that I portray them the word in a correct way. And in some ages, you can deal with the idea of somebody as being a drag queen or whatever. But in some ages, you simply cannot deal with it because mentally, physically, psychologically, you are not prepared for that. Yeah. So I, as a parent, and I think that's where the society's duty comes in, a certain limit has to be made. There is a Hungarian saying that, I don't know if the translation is correct, but anybody, the joke is saying that anybody can be a deer, but it does not give you a right to jump and run across the highway.
Right.
So what is important is not if you are a deer or not, but it's important if there is a highway and you want to go across or not.
Right, well, here's the thing that I think is the deepest issue about Sam Brinton. Again, he's an extreme outlier, but we can reason from him because I think he crosses a line. We live in a society in America now, and increasingly in the West, in which people believe that their desires, all their desires, are self-justifying. We still draw for now a line against pedophilia, but I think that we're coming very close to eroding that. I fear that we are. Now, I think that no society that believes that desire itself is good simply because it's desired, I think you can't hold society together that way.
And guys, why did it happen that these are the most important public policy debates in the United States right now?
What an excellent question.
How did you end up here?
Well, there's a guy named Augusto Del Noce. He's an Italian political theorist. I think he died 30 years ago. And he had this, he's beginning to be rediscovered in America. He had this idea that Marxism lost in Europe. It lost the economic story. By the 1960s, most people knew that Marxism was a failed economic plan. So they switched over to culture and brought Marxist analysis to culture. And that's where so much of the passion of the baby boomer generation, post-60s generation, went into cultural activism. It's so interesting to look at what happened in the US between 1968 and 1972. Prior to 72, most American political fights, with the notable exception of civil rights, had to do with economics and the arrangement of the economy. After 72, so many of the new left had made their way into the Democratic Party that social issues started to become the most powerful ones. And by 1980, Ronald Reagan had emerged from the Republican Party and began to take the Republican Party in a different way. Since then, the culture has been the primary battleground, even though people like
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's
go
correct.
ahead.
No, I think that's correct. Here's one way to think about it. So Marxism wanted to flatten the economic hierarchy, and wokeness wants to invert the privilege hierarchy. And so once you grok that or grasp that fact, it really, it's a heuristic to understand why we, as Americans, talk about this. It's a complex phenomenon. Wilfred Riley, he's an academician in the United States, a black academician, and if I lived in a sane world, I wouldn't have to say that, but he said that wokeism is a mind virus of the lower upper class. And I thought that was like one of the most interesting things that I've heard in a long time. It's a descriptor of a certain social class in which people believe, and again, there are legitimate reasons for this. That's the problem with all of these discussions, is that the core of everything they believe is actually true. You know, there's been horrific racism, there's been horrific sexism and misogyny, and we've done horrible things to homosexuals. But they make that jump off point. So to answer the question directly, they make that jump off point from the failure of Marxism to the adoption of this new postmodern way, and in cynical theories, Helen Plucker-Rose calls it applied postmodernism, the application of these things. But I think thinking about that in terms of inverting the privilege hierarchy is one of the most helpful ways you can think about it.
May I add one thing to that? It's just a hypothesis, so I don't know if it's right or wrong, but from here, at least to me, it seems that it's also linked somehow to the decline of American leadership in the world, because if you look back, America won the Cold War, and the post-Cold War period of time is about Pax Americana. It's about the spread of liberal democracy as a political philosophy, as an economic system, as a cultural production, or whatever. And I think the Americans got used to the idea that they are the leaders of the world, which is factually correct. But and their ideas and their cultural battleground made them successful. But right now there are competitors. So there are newcomers. New powers are emerging. No one knows what will happen until the end of the 21st century. And I have the feeling that the American elite is desperately looking for solution. And if you have to invent something new, metaphysically, a new ideology, a new goal, a new way of strategy, then it's always about conflict, because the American elite, you in the elite, you do not agree on the issues. And that's the point where cultural differences can emerge and can overtake the whole discussion, and that's what happens. So it's because of stagnation. And I think Hungary is not in the same position right now because we are in a different, we're going to a different direction. You were here, and right now you have some kind of stagnation or decline or whatever you call that. Here in Hungary, we were here deep down, but right now there is some kind of progress. So we are confident, more confident metaphysically than you, which is ridiculous because we are the small mouses in the room. Meanwhile, you are the elephant.
Okay, I think this is why. You can't afford to live outside of reality, because compared to the U.S., you're weaker and you're poorer, you're smaller, so you can't afford illusions. We, on the other hand...
That's a great point.
Yeah,
really is.
We have been driven crazy by our power, by our money. I remember back in 2003, there was a famous quote given, I think, to a Washington Post reporter by an unnamed White House staffer. It was said to be Karl Rove, President Bush's political guru. And Rove said to the media, "You don't get it. We make our own reality." And he was explaining that the context of this was that American power is so great, and the war in Iraq had just started maybe a year earlier. American power is so great that we can define reality with the application of money and power. Well, that is, I remember reading that and thinking, this is hubris. Nemesis is going to follow, and in fact it did. We lost in Iraq. We were thrown out of Afghanistan. Finally, we left after all this time, and I'm glad we left, but we never should have tried to build that country anyway into a liberal democracy. But we thought we could do it because, by God, we're Americans. We're rich. We won the Cold War. We have the biggest army in the world. We took a holiday from reality. I think that this is what transgenderism is all about, too. The idea that we can remake even the body, and even something as basic as masculinity and femininity with an application of technology and willpower. Ultimately, it's going to fail, but man, we've got a long way to go, we Americans, before we realize that in the end, you cannot defeat reality. And the countries, right now the US military has become very, very woke. I don't know if you've seen this, a lot of people here seem to have done. Last year, the U.S. military came out with a series of recruitment ads for YouTube, and they're the wokest damn things you've ever seen. And the CIA, too, the CIA's woke recruitment ads. A lot of American conservatives are like, oh my God, the Chinese and the Russians must be laughing at us. But this is what our elites really believe, and they're going to have their heads handed to them in the same way that the Canadian elites are now when they realize, oh my God, if the truckers stop delivering things, we can't have a country.
Yeah, so to me what's interesting about this, one of the things that's interesting about this conversation is it possible to value the wrong things? I mean, the answer is clearly yes. Clearly people value the wrong things. I mean, there are entire societies who value the wrong things. You know, the Dobu tribe values the wrong things. They cast spells on each other and they trade their spells for currency, witchcraft. I mean, it's clearly possible to value the wrong thing.
There are people in my country who actually value the Alabama Crimson Tide over the LSU Tigers. Can you believe it?
I can't speak to that.
She's sitting right there. Carry on.
Oh, okay. Hello, Melissa. So I wanted to talk about something that you said, and then I want to link it to Christianity, because it's something I've been thinking about. So there's something called the substitution hypothesis, which is very interesting. And the substitution hypothesis is that the only reasons, so people, belief is the default. Like, we all have to believe in something. It's just baked into us. And
something beyond ourselves.
Yeah, something beyond ourselves. And so when Christianity or the Abrahamic traditions were the dominant Christianity in the West or in Hungary, when people stop believing in that, it's not like they just, flourish to be Spock-like or however, whatever conception of rational you want to have. It's that they switch to, and no offense when I say this, but they switch to another superstition, or they switch to another set of beliefs, or they switch to some additional metaphysic. And the question is, it's so obvious to me right now, and I say this as someone who does not think that there's sufficient evidence to warrant belief in God. It is so obvious to me that wokeism is a cultural toxin whose explicit intent is to rip down our civilization, is to corrode our institutions, is to destroy our society, is to fragment us into ever smaller divisions. And I think among the questions is, what value set are we better off with? I mean, are we better off, assuming a normal hermeneutic, like a normal interpretation of scripture or text, but I mean, are we better off with the redemption narrative? I mean, clearly that seems to be true. Clearly it seems to me to be better to forgive people than to cancel them to deny them jobs because they tweeted something when they were 14. Yeah. I mean, it's just so obvious to me.
You know, I once interviewed Camille Paglia, the controversial American intellectual, and this was about 15 years ago, and she told me that she lamented the loss of Christianity in American life. I said, Camille, really? You're an atheist and you're an advocate for pagan sexuality. How could you possibly lament the fact that Christianity was dying? She said, well, I don't care about religion. I care about art. I teach art to college students. And I have to spend so much time now explaining basic Bible stories to my students so they can understand the art. And I went back and reread some of the stuff she had written, and Camille Paglia, again, a devout atheist, had wrote an essay once warning, she's gay, by the way, warning her fellow gay activists, be careful trying to tear down religion, because, she said, homosexuality can only flourish in conditions of advanced civilization. And religion is part of one of the pillars that keeps the whole thing going. You tear down religion, it's all going to come falling on us, and it ain't going to be good for gay folks. Well, nobody listened to her, but I think she was really onto something.
Yeah, it's so one of the things that I asked you the other night was, what if we just threw out all the metaphysics? Like, we just tossed it all away. We said, okay, there's probably a historical Jesus. He didn't walk on water. He didn't rise from the dead. Oh, by the way, the other thing that I've been told here like 30 times is that I can say anything I want, so I'm saying it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so
there will be consequences for sure.
Justin Trudeau is going to freeze your bank account.
But what if we just throw out all the metaphysics? Like, there was no like water and wine, and I mean, come on, really? Okay, so we just throw out all that stuff, but we keep some of the core Christian values. Like, is that? Are we like? Go ahead.
You again talking about the Hungarian model? I would say it because. We keep talking about Christianity, but the active proportionality in the society of the active believers, or how do you say, churchgoers, is extremely low. It's around 15% or 17 or something like this. But if you ask the people whether Christian culture, heritage, way of society is important for them, the answer is 80% yes. So these people, not everybody obviously, but among the audience member, there are many people who do think that Christianity as a story, as a narrative, as a moral guideline, as a way of living, it does matter, but it has nothing to do with being an active member of a church. No, and I think and that's part of our survival. That's how we could survive, because when the first king 1,000 years ago, Saint Stephen, forced the Hungarians to be Christians. They had to be forced to be Christian, to convert to Christianity. Only the elites were Christians. not the society. It wasn't the top-down. It wasn't the bottom-up. It was a top-down approach. But after a while, the Hungarians realized that Christian institutions and the churches and the whole story, it's existential, and it helps to protect and to regain the energy inside the society.
I grew up in the world like that, like you described, in the Deep South. I was born in 1967. My family was Protestant, but we didn't go to church except on Easter and Christmas. We didn't have to go to church because everybody was Christian. You felt yourself as a Christian just by being part of society. And my parents' generation were fools because they couldn't imagine that Christianity would go away. Now, their grandchildren's generation are fighting to hold on to the faith. It is declining rapidly, even in a formerly culturally conservative and culturally Christian part of the American South. I talk to pastors all the time, Catholic and Protestant pastors, who are just, they don't know what to do. Because if church going was seen as simply the thing you did to be a respectable, good citizen of our town, of our society, then when suddenly, when you get to a point where it doesn't really matter, there's no social price to be paid for not going to church, you won't go, and the religion will fall. I would rather live in a place that's culturally Christian than anti-Christian or not Christian at all, but I would say that in the face of this competing religion of wokeness, that cultural Christianity is just not going to make it. And I would point out that in the 4th century, Roman paganism was still so powerful within Roman civilization. Christians were rising. As we all know, Constantine converted to Christianity. But still, the elite pagans of Roman society, they didn't take it very seriously because they said, well, we've always been pagan. The Romans have always been pagan. We always will be, so we can tolerate this. By the end of the 4th century, paganism was on the way out, and people did not see it coming. I believe we're living through that situation right now with Christianity. I'm a practicing Orthodox Christian. I hope it doesn't happen, but I wrote this book, The Benedict Option, which is on sale back there. Come tomorrow. Because I believe that Christians who want to hold on to the faith had better take it very seriously and better start taking emergency measures to pass the faith on to our children and to live it out in a post-Christian world. I don't know what's coming afterwards. It could be wokeness. Wokeness works as a religion. But I think people can't live without faith. Something is coming. I don't have a lot of confidence that Christianity is going to rally.
I think that's the point where patriotism as a religion can come in. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but on this part of the world, patriotism, feeling love of your homeland, is just it just works like a religion. We Hungarian, I think the most important. I cannot say that the most important religion for us is Catholicism, because we have Protestants as well. So for them, Protestantism is the most important religion. But they are both freedom-loving Hungarians. And the idea of nationalism in a positive way, it has a driving force. And that's why among the young generations, the number of the situation is not so bad, because they found something, probably not Jesus, probably not God. It can happen later. Some they already found him, but some not. It can happen later. But they found a purpose. They found a meaning of life, a public meaning of life, not a personal meaning of life, to help to this country to emerge.
I would say that as a Christian, that makes me fear idolatry. You see this happen in a lot of Christian churches, the more conservative churches. They mix up worship of the state or of the nation with worship of God. And I think that's extremely dangerous. But how could you, Balázs?
I would do the two things. I would keep the two things separate.
Okay,
for sure.
But how could you separate? How could one separate a proper patriotism, a love of one's homeland and its people, from what happened to Germany, where it became a malignant worship of the tribe? Germany during World War II.
But that's the problem with any mimetic spread of a belief. Or that, I mean, you could have the most extreme version of the Quran or I mean, that's always a problem with an ideology, right? Or no?
Yeah, it always could. It has to have some limit. But this is one thing that I fear, because I'll tell you a story. I remember I was in New York on 9/11. I worked for the New York Post as a columnist on September 11th. I was standing on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I watched the South Tower come down, and it was the most traumatic thing I've ever seen in my whole life. I came back to my apartment in Brooklyn, and my wife said I was in shock, literally in shock. And the thing was so traumatic to me, the sense of violation of our country, of our nation, was so traumatic that I was willing to believe anything the U.S. government said to make some Arab SOB pay for what happened. I didn't tell myself that because I would have immediately understood that was wrong, that was immoral, that was unreasonable. Rather, I veiled it all in patriotism and we must defend the country and all that. And I supported the Iraq War. I was wrong to do that. I learned that later. And in the end, I've had a long time to think about how my own emotions, my own love of country was exploited by people who, in my own government, who wanted to take our government and our nation to a stupid war that was very destructive to the Middle East, to Christian communities, and ultimately to our own country. So I bring that story up to say that it was one of the most important things that ever happened to me, because it taught me how emotion can take control of reason and lead me to take a good thing, defense of the country, and take it to a very bad place.
I understand what you are saying. The only thing I want to answer is that, you know, the United States of America is an empire. And you think, whether it's right or wrong, it's up to discussion, but you think that it's part of your duty to protect and manage the whole world. Meanwhile, here in Hungary, we don't have anything like this. If you keep asking those people who are in the audience whether they think that Hungary should be very actively involved in making judgments, different parts of the world, their answer would be no.
Can we? Let's
yes,
do it. Let's
of course.
Do it. Go ahead. I'm curious.
Of course. Who wants to have a more expansionist, how can we describe it, Hungarian foreign policy?
Raise your hand.
Not talking
the American.
Not
the only American
the
raises
only
their
American.
hand.
Good.
Oh, it's
That's fascinating.
Trianon's got to her.
Yeah,
Fascinating. And but you have
know,
to.
right now we have Hungarian soldiers in.
We have to ask the other question.
Yeah.
Who doesn't? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay. So the vast majority of people do.
I can remember before I became a politician, I used to work for a think tank which was linked also to MCC, and it was dealing with migration. And it was part of our strategy to visit all the affected lands. So I visited many of the Middle East conflict zones. I've been in Libya, in Bangladesh, in Iraq, Syria, Sub-Saharan African, very unstable countries.
Portland, Oregon.
And I can remember when I came back from that visit, my most important experience was that, which I brought home, is that the world is full of conflicts. You know, who is right, who is wrong in the Libyan case? Or if you talk about Israel, who is right, who is wrong, the Arabs, the Palestinians, or the Israelis? Who is right, who is wrong? Who is right, who is wrong? And who am I to judge? Do I have the capability of deciding these ancient conflicts? And right now, Hungary is not a strong country, so we don't have the tools to be involved in conflict. But I imagine the situation, if I have the power, or our country have the power, should we be involved in these conflicts? Should we be the judges? Morally, am I superior to that? And I can tell to that sub-Saharan tribe that what they are thinking is wrong, and the other tribe, they are right. It's just, you know, it fits it does not fit to Hungarian thinking. And that's a defense line for you if you have this kind of mindset, which is obviously very hard in the United States of America, where you are the most powerful empire.
Well, I think that the whole experience of Iraq and Afghanistan should have chastened us Americans to realize that we may be an empire, but we are a declining empire. I fear that we're like the Ottoman Empire. We have so many problems at home that we need to take care of. Some people on the American right have said, why should we Americans worry about Ukraine's borders when we can't even control our own southern border? And I think there's something to that, right? I think that we are living in America off of the grandeur of the past. And I'm a conservative. I used to be very hawkish, but the Iraq and Afghanistan thing had taught me something, I think, about the limits of American power and the limits of the American imagination. Because whether you're liberal or conservative in America, you tend to think of America in the same way the French used to think about France, as having a mission civilisatrice, a civilizing mission to the rest of the world to bring them democracy and liberty and all that. I think a lot of that was, frankly, I hate to sound like a Marxist, but I think a lot of that was a cover for imperialism.
And what is the left saying about foreign policy?
You want me to speak for the whole left?
I don't know, just
I certainly
some
don't speak
parts
for the
of
whole right, but
No, I think that the Afghanistan thing was a deep blow. And what's amazing to me is I almost hear nobody talking about the catastrophe that was the Afghan pullout. I mean, that's just astonishing to me. I wanted to, if it's okay, because don't we do questions in 3 minutes? Are we doing questions in 3 minutes or what?
Yeah, but we have. How many more minutes we have?
well, look down there.
Oh, okay.
33.
33.
Okay, so to answer the question, I don't really know. I don't think that there's a consensus on the left. Here's the part of the problem. I think that not even many on the left has been parasitized by an invasive value. It's like a parasite latching on to the left. And they've bartered kind of class consciousness or economic quote-unquote justice with a new identity politics. And so the problem as I see it is that most people on the left don't think that there are things in the United States worth fighting for. And that is heartbreaking. That is heartbreaking. But I wanted to pivot, if it's okay, to use some of the remaining time that I had, or that we have together, and ask you if is there some issue that you've been thinking about, either one of you have been thinking about morally, that either relates to Hungary or the United States or overall, that you just wanted to just kind of throw out there? If not, that's fine too.
No, this is something I struggle with being here in Hungary, admiring the government, loving this country and its people, but I'm really torn about the future of my own country and our own liberal society. I want to live in a proper liberal democracy, one that is tolerant, where people don't have to be afraid of saying what they want to say. People don't have to worry about, facing personal and economic ruin because they get on the wrong side of the people in power, where people can have conversations, et cetera, et cetera. The world I grew up in, it wasn't paradise, but we could at least have these discussions. We don't have that anymore. I worry, though, that possibility of going back to that may not be an option. I keep wanting to believe that we could get back to that, but I have other friends on the right who say, you're dreaming, that we're going to live in an illiberal society. The only question is it going to be illiberal from the left or illiberal from the right? And if those are the only choices, then we're back to Spanish Civil War. Then I, as someone of the right, I've got to choose the right.
That's the national divorce again.
Right, but I guess the question I worry about and I wonder about is, do we have the possibility of preserving liberalism, or are we truly post-liberal? When I look to Hungary, there's the whole thing where Prime Minister Orbán said famously or infamously, I'm in favor of illiberal democracy. He tried to explain to us the other day what he really meant was he's for conservative policies within a democracy. But I honestly don't know if it's a matter of power now, and if liberal values don't have enough, classical liberal values don't have enough support on either the left or the right to matter anymore.
Yeah, that's, that's, in a nutshell, that's one of my main fears. And even though we have, and I'm not going to whitewash the differences, pretty extremely different metaphysics, and we'd have to really drill down on the moral issue. I think that the thing that's really important, the frame that I've come to think about in the last few years, is cognitive liberty. That's, to me, what this whole thing is about.
What's that?
So it's the idea that you can believe what you want to believe, and I can believe what I want to believe. And this is why I think that the wall between, for me, as I look at it, the wall between church and state is so important, the separation. You should be free to believe what you want to believe. You should be free to engage in communities that you want to believe. That's why we have a constitution, and the constitution will always trump state law, right? So there are federal laws that we have in the United States, but the idea of cognitive liberty, to me, that's the thing that binds us, that enables us to live in freedom. I mean,
Peter, I think that's very abstract, and one of our founding fathers, John Adams, famously said in the 1700s that our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, will only work for a moral and religious people. It is not suited for any other. And I think what he meant by that is the liberal freedoms that we have, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and so forth, they work when the Constitution is bounded on the outside by a shared metaphysic, by a shared religion or something like that. And the fact that we have lost a shared religion and a shared metaphysic has a lot to do with the problems we have today. You're a philosopher. Alistair McIntyre is, I think, a real prophetic philosopher. He's in his 90s now. He teaches at the University of Notre Dame in the US. But McIntyre wrote a famous book in the early 80s called After Virtue. And he was an atheist then and a Marxist. He became a Catholic. But McIntyre said that the Enlightenment has failed because it failed to produce a binding moral code that can exist on reason alone. And because it failed, all of our arguments now have been reduced to people arguing about emotion. And he didn't know what's coming next.
Yeah, I think that's clearly false, that it's failed. I mean, you read that in Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, things are getting better. You read that in Michael Shermer's The Moral Arc, which is a phrase taken from Martin Luther King, that the moral arc bends towards justice. And if you actually look at the data, and admittedly the last couple of years has been a blip, things are actually getting better. And Heather McDonald talked about this on one of her panels. The United States is the least racist it's ever been. There's just simply no question about it. We have extirpated the laws off of the books, that we've really done, and I'm not saying that there's not work to do, and I'm certainly not saying that there are not pockets of racism in the country, but our institutions are solid. They've been dented, to be sure, but they're solid in what?
I think the moral arc of where we are now bends not towards justice, but towards Sam Brinton, towards anarchy, moral anarchy and destruction, because I believe that we have created a society in which, and this is maybe my love for Michel Houellebecq, the French novelist coming out, we have created a society where the only thing that people seem to believe in is shopping and sexual satisfaction. And I think ultimately we are not producing ourselves. We are going to lose ourselves if we don't come back from the edge. And Steven Pinker is correct that things are better in many material ways than they've ever been, but most people don't see it that way. And in a sense, if they don't recognize that things are better materially, there's something spiritually that's lacking. And without that sense of vision, you're going to have wokeness, the young people trying to fill that hole, that God-shaped hole in their hearts with some belief. And I think that's where wokeness comes from.
Finally, I can be on Rod's side. So yeah, because there is a Hungarian musical song which is about a small wolf who is joining to a group of wolves, and they are singing, and the song is about that. Finally, I can join the group, and that's how I can have freedom. And freedom means that I'm finally part of the group of wolves, where there is hierarchy for sure, where there are rules, where you are becoming part of a social structure. So I think it's very important that freedom, it does not mean that you are on your own. Then freedom is useless. If there is nobody around you, if there is nobody on your side, then freedom is useless. It's not a social glue. It's always community, which can be a social glue. But if you think that, then you have to find something, a common ground, which can be shared by the people. It can be a religious belief. It can be nation. It can be some idea of deliberating the poor African people, or everything else. That's how modern social movements also working.
Okay.
They have a kind of goal which creates a common ground. So you need that. If you are neutral, if you are only focusing on freedom, then it will just tear apart.
Okay, so now you're probably really going to be on Rod's side here. I don't think that there's any moral is or ought to anybody's sexual proclivities. So the Sam Brinton thing, I don't see that as
I never ever was thinking about sexuality about this question.
No, but I was thinking
So
that
sexuality is obviously
in
not
terms
part
of what
this.
Rod said. In terms of what Rod said, like that's the telos of what happens when you tear down the traditional religious or moral structures, and I don't
you
see
know,
that's
if
the
you
case.
if you know just the question how, for example, Rod and what's the name of the guy again, the dog guy?
Oh, Sam Brinton.
Sam. How Rod and Sam can find a common ground. Obviously, Rod is a Christian. Sam most probably not. Rod is have a heterosexual sexual life.
Sam is a poodle. So.
Sam is a.
I'm a Christian. He's a poodle.
Oh, okay. Sam is a different one. But if you talk about only these issues, then
That's right.
that you always talk about the differences. But if there is something which can unite Sam and Rod,
Right.
Which is obviously not sexuality.
Right.
It's about, for example,
Nationhood?
defending your country.
Okay, so
Then it will work.
Right.
Because probably Sam can be a good soldier. He probably is a capable man of defending his own country.
Certainly the U.S. military today would welcome him and probably make him a four-star general.
See? Finally arrived to the point.
God bless America.
So in physics you call that superordinate. Like, and I think what we need to do, and I've seen this in Hungary from my month here, is instead of going down the intersectional path where we look for smaller and smaller, differences. Oh, he's straight, or he's this, or this guy's in a wheelchair. He's unable. I think what we need to do is we need to look for things that unite us, for commonalities that we have. And I think it's the basis for those commonalities that form communities.
Yeah, so it can be positive things, positive emotions, but also negative emotions. So, for example, in Hungary, among the audience, there are many people who are coming from different political circles. Probably they vote for the government, some of them they vote for the opposition. Okay, we list them, but still, there must be some. But try to be serious. But if you ask people whether they agree on protecting our borders and not letting illegal migrants coming into our country, then it's 90%. Let's do it.
Do it. Ask.
Yeah. Who is agreeing with only with that policy on the migration issue, that we have a fence on the southern borders and we created the system where you cannot enter Hungary illegally? Who is in favor of that?
Wow.
Who is against it?
Wow, not a single person.
Well, but I have to say here, Balázs, that in our country, me and Peter's country, it is the left that is primarily making it impossible to have these communities by making people have to fear, ordinary people have to fear for their jobs.
Right. So, but okay. So, I was right up with you until you said jobs. But I want to go seed the conversation back into cognitive liberty thing. So you have what you believe. I have what I believe. I don't believe what you believe, but you have every right to believe, and I want you to believe what you believe, and I want you to live according to borrow a phrase, the dictates of your own conscience. But what we have now is we have people. Basically, we have an ideology that's telling you what to believe. And to me, that's insidious. And that's un-American, too.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not just a matter of belief, but a matter of what you do. Because to be a Christian is not simply to affirm things with your mind, but to behave and not behave in certain ways with your body in the real world. And it's my experience, I mean, because I'm a conservative and a conservative Christian, that it's the left that's making us so afraid that we're going to be canceled. You don't have right-wing people in general running around trying to cancel people, trying to get them fired or destroy their businesses for taking a certain stance on sexuality, on race, whatever. This is something, this fever that has come from the left. And I'm not talking about the nice guy at the Union Hall. I'm talking about academics, media people, those in diversity, equity, inclusion departments and major corporations. These are the people that are making it impossible for us to try to find common ground because you're afraid to say what you think because you never know. What you say today that was fine yesterday, some woke activist within your company, asked Barry Weiss from the New York Times, is going to try to drive you out.
Actually, and that's the reason why I think currently among the Hungarian and American conservative circles, the discussion is very vivid because and it's a Reaganian heritage actually, because what Ronald Reagan was famously saying that the most terrifying sentence is that I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. I think that's the quote. So that's how American conservatives were thinking in the 80s. But with this policy, you ended up vogued by the left. Because the vogue is, if they are in power, because if the left is in power, they openly using their resources to support their values and to change the society. Meanwhile, the American right is not doing that. You are saying that, oh, we shouldn't interfere. And I think that's different, because here in Hungary and in some of the Central European countries, or I can say in Europe, it's more acceptable that the state is actively involved in these kind of issues. And it's not against freedom. Because, for example, here in Hungary, if you don't want to have children, or if you want to have abortion, you can do it freely. There are no serious restrictions, especially in the abortion case. But the government is openly, with soft power and with family subsidies, so with money, it's openly campaigning to convince you freely that if you want to have children, you should have it. If not, then you have the right to make another decision. But the role of the state should be very much undermined. And the American conservatives will be not successful without that paradigm shift.
No, I think you're right about that. And it's the rise of woke capitalism, for example, that has really changed my mind on this. You know, I have this book out, Live Not by Lies, that talks about what I call soft totalitarianism. It's the emergence in the US, and I think throughout the West, of a form of totalitarianism that doesn't look like Stalinism 2.0, but it is nevertheless totalitarian because it politicizes everything in a society, and it only allows for one ideology to rule. I was first told about this by people who came from Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Poland and Russia who escaped communism to the US and who are now quite old and say the things we see happening in America today remind us of what we left behind. Well, as an American, this seems crazy to me, but the more I listened to them and talked to them and tried to understand what they were saying, I saw it too. But it's not coming from the state, which is classic totalitarianism, or only partly from the state. It is rather what happens when the entire elite class, those who run the institutions, universities, media, major corporations, sports, law, medicine, and now the military, when they're all on the same ideological page.
I understand what you were saying, Rod, but I think it's only an excuse. And because you have one solution, and this solution is democracy.
No,
because right now we have democracy, it means that people can support you, and if you have the majority, then you have the resources to do the good things.
No, but
you have to be supported by the people, and it's not easy to gain and convince them to support you. But I think that's always our best chance to convince the people to support politicians who stand for their values, and then these politicians can use the tools to reach some
But that's
change.
what to finish my thought, though, I was going to say that I believe that we on the right have got to use the state to defend the possibility of having a place in the public square for ourselves. For example, Heather McDonald, who's been here this past couple of days, has a fantastic and terrifying essay in the current issue of City Journal. You can see it online, about the Art Institute of Chicago, one of America's great museums. It's destroying itself with wokeness. And you watch what's happening about how the museum is condemning most of its art as white supremacist, blah, blah, blah. You think, well, this is a private institution that can do what it wants. Yes, but surely if the federal government would pass laws saying we will give no support to these museums that destroy themselves with this ideology, I think that's something that could work. And we have to be on the right, not be afraid to do this anymore, because our civilization, our institutions of our civilization are at stake. Should we ask a
question?
Yeah, I was thinking that we're way over for the questions, but yeah.
Go ahead, Peter.
Questions from the audience? I don't know
Professor
how we
Katz
want
seems to
to. Oh,
have-
we have someone with a microphone here.
What are your pronouns, sir?
As somebody once said, my pronouns are EFF/you. That wasn't me. With some reluctance, I'd like to come back to Sam Brinton, and I have a question for you, Peter, because there's something you said that I think you need to develop further, or at least I don't understand it. You suggested that if he were a gardener, that would not be a problem. If he were a cop, it would be a greater problem. I'm not quite sure how you justify that, and I'd like you to do that. And along the same lines, perhaps, and this is, I guess, a question for all of you, what's the line there between being a cop and a gardener and being a government official? Is there a continuum there, or is being a governmental official on an entirely different plane from being either a gardener or a cop?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. The reason I said that is because I didn't know the answer, and I kind of wanted to think out loud as a way to model the importance of like taking an intellectual risk. So my thinking, and I could totally be wrong, this is just off the top of my head, that what the person does matters. So if the person has a kink that's directly related to his or her job, and to me, kind of any kind of like kinky like race play would I don't even want to say what the image that comes to my mind is, but it would seem to me that would manifest itself if one were a cop, if one had like, plantation games or something creepy. But it wouldn't manifest itself if one were a gardener. Now one could say, okay, so what if you were, and again, I'm thinking out loud here, what if one were a gardener and they wanted to garden at a black person's home, and those videos of them doing this horrible thing to people they put in blackface or whatever the kink is. Again, I don't know the answers to the question, but it seems to me what the kink is relevant to the job. Like, and just throwing this out there, like, what if his kink was like something really like he worked with some, I don't know, like throwing nuclear waste around was part of his kink. I don't know, like some like uber creepy thing. But it would seem that what they do for a living would have to play a role. It would seem to me.
I just don't see it. I think that, look, if he's a gardener and into this stuff, if I'm his pastor, I care. If I'm his brother, I care. But I don't think that it should rise to the level of public concern if he's just a gardener and is a weirdo like that. But to whom much is given, much is expected. I think to elevate someone who is that open about their perversion is and dysfunction should be disqualified.
But I think you actually made my point. That's the point. Like, if he's a gardener, so what? But if he's a cop, that does make a difference.
Well, no, I don't think it has to have directly result to his work. I mean, I think that somebody who is that narcissistic that they display this sort of thing.
All right,
in
hold
public.
on. So listen. So would you agree that it's clearly bad if he? Let's take the one thing I'm sure we can agree upon. Let's say that he has some creepy child play, and then he's like a school bus driver, or
I think he should be in jail, whatever his job is. If that's
okay, but the point is that it matters what he does. Whereas he was just.
I think the cop is a very interesting question, and effectivity comes in, because I think that it would be for him very hard to be a cop, because he has to serve on the streets. So he will have direct contact with people who will immediately react on him in a negative way, and it can decrease his level of effectivity. I think that can be a problem. I'm not saying we should not let him being a cop if he wants to be, but it would make his life quite hard, according to my understanding. But
so the context matters.
Context matters, but as a government official or even an elected politician, it's the decision of the people. So right now we have an election campaign in Hungary, and the candidate of the opposition openly told to all the Fidesz supporters that they are mushrooms which are kept in darkness and fed with
Feces.
Feces. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Feces.
Feces. So kept in the darkness and fed with feces and mushrooms. That's who we are. Yeah, sorry. So what should be done? Should be government or the state or the law or some restriction involved? Obviously not.
I think the voters will make their choice.
Exactly. That's the point.
Do we have time for a couple more, maybe?
I think we. Does that answer your question, Professor? Okay. Yeah. So the bottom line with that is, I do think the context matters.
Sorry, my question would be, if we could draw a line, because this one you did not address, is because of whatever his kink, whatever, but was he hired despite of it, or was he hired because of it? And for me, that would be an interesting question.
Well, he is.
Ultimately, we can't say.
We really don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that I've been told by someone who knows him, someone who's here in Hungary who knows him, that he's actually quite good at his job, at his expertise. But I think that it's probably been he probably was hired in part because of who he is, because his previous job was not in the nuclear waste field. It was in LGBT activism at the national level. So I'm sure that the Biden administration, being liberals, feel like they get a lot of diversity points for hiring the nuclear engineer who wears high heels, a dress, and lipstick under his mustache.
Yeah, so part of the problem is that meritocracy is under attack now. So it could be an exogenous or an outside consideration. So we really don't know. But we do know that externally on paper, he looks excellent. Like he has two degrees from MIT. People have said that he really knows what he's talking about. But ultimately, I don't think we know the reasons. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if he were hired, if that played a role in his hiring. That would not surprise me in the current administration.
Yeah, because we have an entire elite class now that factors in, quote unquote, diversity as a component of quality. I remember once having an argument with the senior editor at a major American newspaper at a conference about this, and my position was that the push for diversity in the newsroom and in things we publish in the newspapers is causing us to skimp on quality. That the journalism is not as high quality because we're hiring people not because of their ability to report completely or for their writing skills, but because of the color of their skin or their sexuality. The woman I was arguing with didn't disagree with me that the writing wasn't as high as it should be or the reporting skills weren't as high as they should be. But she said rather, but diversity is one aspect of quality. I think that's just false, but this is the ideology.
It's blatantly false. I mean, that's why there's no diversity on professional sports teams.
Yeah. Now, isn't that interesting, though? The only two fields in American life where we don't believe this diversity bullshit are professional sports and music. The only thing that matters with sports and music is, what's that?
Men's sports.
Yeah. That's right. Well, now, I'm sorry, maybe I should take sports out because we've seen the case of the transgender female swimmer. Anyway, but you're right, though. Nobody is going to push for professional basketball or football teams that, quote, unquote, look like America because winning matters too much. We in America, the only thing we really care about top quality in is sports.
Can we get some more questions?
We only have a few more minutes, so please make sure to keep your questions short and sweet. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember the famous case of Gary Hart from 1986 when he was the Democratic Party's presidential candidate.
Right.
And he lost his candidacy because of a love affair or a mistress who wasn't a dog or a deer, but not even a male, but a woman.
Thank you for
So
that
don't you think that there's a full-scale moral crisis in the United States and in general in the whole West, basically after 30 years compared to Gary Hart?
Well, I think there's a full-scale crisis. I wouldn't say it's was started by Gary Hart, really, but we've always had powerful men who cheated on their wives. And Bill Clinton suddenly made Gary Hart seem like somebody from the 19th century. But I think the moral crisis is, the core of the moral crisis is we are afraid to talk about reality, things that are real and things that aren't real. We're afraid to draw moral distinctions, and we have come to the point, we have degenerated to the point where we believe that morality is determined by personal feeling, personal desire, and by power in the end, because those who have power in American society now they're very moral in what they believe. They just believe things that half the country believes are immoral.
All right, let's see if we have like 2 minutes. Let's see if we can keep going.
I am an American conservative. I believe in small government. And now I've come to Hungary, and I see that they're using their government to largely incentivize marriage rates and increase birth rates. And so obviously I understand that American conservatism and European conservatism are not exactly the same, but as an American who believes in small government, what are we to think about how the government's intervention and incentivizing of marriage and procreation, is that something we should emulate?
Yes. No, and I think that the small government conservatism, I think it's dead, and I think Donald Trump killed it. And I think I'm glad he killed it, because Trump realized that the only people who really cared about small government were conservative activists, and that most normal people who would vote conservative, they like to have a strong government. They just want it to be on their side, and I tend to agree with them on that.
Let's see if we can. Oh, you want to take that, and then we can do one more.
Something came into my mind that even here in Hungary we have a right-wing conservative government, and obviously we believe in free market, but there are some strategic points where the government should be involved. But right now we have a huge inflation rate, and it hurts the people. So the government made the decision to make price cap, to put price cap on gas, which is obviously not a conservative, not a liberal policy decision. It's a socialist policy decision. But does it help the people? Is it common sense? Yes. So then a conservative government, which is pragmatic, it should follow that direction. So if you are a conservative, then pragmatism and common sense is more important than all the dogmas conservatives invented in the last decades, according to my understanding.
Well, and one of the things that we on the right have seen, I mean, my conservatism is not economic, it's social and cultural primarily. We have seen how the unfettered free market over the last 30 or 40 years has actually hurt communities by making it easy for big business to take manufacturing jobs and move them overseas. That hurts the thing that conservatives ought to be concerned with conserving above all, the family.
Probably one last question. How do you feel about it?
It's always the last one's always the brutal one.
Is it possible that, in fact, Heather's reference this afternoon to being a spoiled brat, that the economic situation in the United States got to be very cushy and very comfortable, and in fact, we are now looking at petty things because we have, it seems, almost nothing else to do. This navel gazing is causing great harm. Hungary is still hungry, and it is in the sense of aspiring to something. And I think somehow the U.S. has fallen behind morally because of this prosperity.
It's decadence, is what you're talking about.
Yeah, the thing that I find so distressing about this is we've already have the intellectual and scholastic infrastructure that we've been engaging these problems. John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, Jonathan Rauch's The Constitution of Knowledge is one of the best books I've read in the last 20 years. John Rawls' The Theory of Justice. Like, we have done the intellectual work, and we know, and we can, people from across divides, we can come to certain basic conclusions about what, I mean, from Aristotle, what leads to human flourishing in Aristotle's ethics. The problem is that we have produced people who are cocksure. We have produced a generation, even more than that now, of people who haven't done the hard work to think about the history of ideas and what matters. And Professor Katz's talk, he talks about how they want to do away with certain fundamentals in departments. I mean, people are actually talking about decolonizing the curriculum now and removing, for example, Shakespeare from English curricula. I guess in that sense, I'm certainly not a conservative, but a traditionalist. I mean, I believe people should read classic text. I believe people should read Plato is one of the fundamental pieces. I mean, Plato's Republic is, in my opinion, the most important book of all time. But the larger point is, I'm not so sure of the role of economics and comfort and safety, but I am sure that we are producing people who have no respect for the canon of knowledge before them. And given that, it's extraordinarily difficult. We've bartered that for self-esteem. But that's, Aristotle in the ethics trade, self-esteem comes as a byproduct of something else. We don't teach. The whole system is like K through 12 and college system is geared for self-esteem. Everybody gets an A. I mean, grade inflation is absolutely out of control. And so I think that we've had a forgetting. We've done the intellectual work. We've wrestled with these questions. We know we know why due process is good. We know why the role of precedent in American jurisprudence is important for us to maintain a lawful society. Like, we've done the work. But the problem is we haven't taught those things to students in a way that they can articulate and fight back on. We have dominant narratives and beliefs of people occupying the universities, which are our engines of knowledge production, and that scholarship is compromised and corrupted. And to me, maybe that's my lens, but that's what I see the problem as.
Yeah, and just very quickly on this, I think that we have, as I said earlier, our wealth and our technology and our liberty has made us quite decadent. We've come to think that this is the normal conditions of life. And we have become, many of us in America have become the sort of people who expect perfection. You know, we don't have a tragic sense of life. We don't know that we could lose it all if we're not careful. Europeans don't have that luxury. But we Americans have been very blessed by God to have liberty and so on and so forth. But I think that we don't know what we don't know anymore. And I'll end with this. There was a commercial I saw last week that Nike put out. It's one of the wokest companies. It put up about the Olympics, and it showed a young black woman, a college student, sitting in her classroom listening to a lecture about the Greeks and Alexander the Great. And she said, "Why should I listen to this garbage? I want to hear about great people who look like me." And then she starts talking about the American women's basketball team. And she goes, "That's a real dynasty. That's a truly great dynasty. They're women. They're women of color. Many of them are lesbians," on and on and on. And I thought, this is America in 2022. You know, the idea that she has nothing to learn from Alexander the Great. He was the one they were referring to because he's a dead white European male. But the real greatness is this sports team because they look like her. Well, it's the worship of the self. We have become a country, I'm sorry to say, that worships not God, not greatness, not virtue, but the self.
Yeah, not reason, not evidence, not epistemic adequacy, not rigor. So we've go ahead.
Yeah, no, and if we don't live in the real world, there will be consequences. When the bridges start falling down because they have ceased to hire engineers who know how to do math, and they have rather hired according to the dictates of the diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, then finally we might turn around and relearn. But I remind you that when Rome fell in the West, the Roman Empire fell in the West, the collapse was so great that it took 1,000 years for Europeans to learn how to do things like build roofs as well as the Romans did. It can happen that quickly. I don't think we'll lose that kind of knowledge, but right now we are losing the knowledge of how to do the most fundamental thing any civilization can do, which is to produce the next generation. We're forgetting what family is. We're forgetting what male and female are. We're forgetting how to form and support a family, the kind of society you need for that. This is the great forgetting that is so much more dangerous than material loss. I remember when I was here in Budapest last summer, I was talking to a young woman about the election next year, and she said that she was a Fidesz voter, but she said that she doesn't like the corruption that she sees among some in the government, supporters of the government. She said, "But I tell you what, I'm still going to vote Fidesz because they will keep gender ideology from coming to this country." And that's the kind of corruption, she said, that once it takes root in the country, it's over. And I think she's right about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.